Good morning. Welcome to the Master Plan for Aging Webinar Wednesday, number 3 on housing. I'm Kim McCoy-Wade, Director of the California Department of Aging, and are thrilled to welcome you to this session for information and input to the Governor's Master Plan for Aging. Webinar Wednesdays, if you haven't joined us yet, are our new experiment in engaging more of California in this critical planning opportunity for a livable California for all across the lifespan. We'll be here every Wednesday from 9:30 to 11. If you missed us the last 2 weeks, we'd had a great conversation about healthy aging and about older employment. Materials from those conversations, including your input on the master plan, are posted on our webpage. You can find all information about upcoming and previous at engageca.org. You never have to register, all are welcome. And be ready to speak up and use your voice. We will have more and more polling and interaction and comment opportunity thanks to Zoom, and we cannot wait to hear from you. Each webinar, we are so lucky to feature a state partner with us at the Department of Aging, a local leader who is breaking new ground in the field we're focusing on, and one of our stakeholder advisory committee members who is tasked with hearing all these recommendations from the public, from partners, from leaders, and helping us make the best possible plan. We're open to hearing stories, data, programs, services, recommendations. You're going to hear it all, and we want to hear all for you. For any and all information about the master plan or webinar Wednesdays, we do encourage you to check out our new site, engageca.org. Now in English, Spanish, and traditional Chinese. To get us started with the interactive part, there will be polls that ask you a range of questions. While I do my brief intro, we'll be doing a few questions to find out who's here with us today, and then we'll get into more housing-specific conversation as we roll. So as I mentioned, we have an all-star team here for housing. We are so delighted to be joined by Deputy Secretary Lynn Von Koch-Liebert, who is the Deputy Secretary at California Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency. Mia Kong, who wears many hats. She is both a housing developer, Senior Vice President Related California, and also a member of the California Commission on Aging. And then Jeannie Parker Martin, who also wears many hats. We've neglected to list that she's also an RN and MPH, as well as President and CEO of Leading Age California, and a member of our Stakeholder Advisory Committee, again, tasked with informing and advising the administration on the Master Plan for Aging. So briefly, what is the Master Plan for Aging? Governor Newsom in June issued an executive order recognizing that California is changing and calling for the state to have a 10-year person-centered data-driven plan to make sure we are the best place to age, with both a stakeholder advisory committee as well as a research subcommittee to be sure we're data-driven, and a special focus on the long-term services and supports we all need as we age and experience disability. So again, we are very data-driven. So California is aging. You can look back a few years and see that these population tables looked like a pyramid. There were more people at the younger years than there were at the top of the pyramid, the later decades. Fast forward to 2030, more of us have aged, more of us are living longer, and the population pyramid is now a population pillar. This has profound consequences for our families, for our communities, for our lives, and we are getting ready together. Importantly, aging is changing in many ways, and one of the ways is that it's diversifying. The next slide shows that while older California is still majority white, that will be changing by 2030 with a growing diversity, so that older California will look more like all of California and reflect our wonderful diversity in our state. So in short, aging is changing. More diversity in aging. More of us are living alone as we age. More of us are at risk of poverty. And there's more awareness of the different stages of aging as we have greater longevity, ranging from perhaps great independence and activity, through more assistance, through significant frailty and assistance, are all stages that we may pass through at different times. So with that information, grounding us, we said, what are our vision and values for California? And with our stakeholders, we were very clear that we mean California for all across the lifespan. And important values are choices, equity, dignity and disruption of age bias, ableism, and discrimination, inclusion and accessibility for all older adults and people with disabilities, both innovation and evidence-informed practice, and deep partnerships among local, state, and federal government, philanthropy, and private sector, like you'll see here today. Our mission is to produce, by October, a person-centered, data-driven 10-year plan that will include a state action plan, a local blueprint for local communities to help organize, prioritize how they become and continue to grow as livable communities. That'll be informed by a new data dashboard on aging with state and local data. And of course, we want to connect people to share those best practices that are working in communities or states or even other nations so that we can try to replicate and adapt here in California. So to organize this amazing work, we have been talking about it in 4 areas of goals that resonate for us. We all want to live where we choose as we age and have the help we and our families need to do so is our first goal, shorthand services and supports. Our second goal, where we're focusing today, is livable communities and purpose. We all live in and be engaged in communities that are age-friendly, dementia-friendly, disability-friendly. Our third goal, health and well-being. We will live in communities and have access to services and care that optimize our health and quality of life. And our fourth goal, economic security and safety. We will have economic security and be safe from abuse, neglect, exploitation, as well as natural disasters and emergencies throughout our lives. So why are we turning to housing? I will not surprise anyone who is on this call that housing is and possibly the top priority for California right now. You can see this in our state budget, where our governor and legislature came together to prioritize $1.75 billion with a B investment in new housing. Again, partnership with the governor and legislature on 18 bills to boost housing production. And we're very excited to learn last week that we'll be welcoming a new Secretary of Business, Housing, and Consumer Services Agency, Lourdes Castro Ramirez, in March, building on the legacy of Secretary Podesta, who's been a wonderful public servant as well. So lots of prioritization for housing in the state, as we all recognize that livable communities for all of us, whether 8 or 80 or under the same roof in our families, is key to California for all. So housing isn't just a priority for the state, it is of course a priority for master plan. Couple observations, it has already surfaced as the top area for public comment. If you look at the summary of public comments on our website, you will see housing, housing, housing. And embedded in that are comments we're receiving about affordability, about accessibility, stairs and railings and bathroom access, all the issues that are important as we age. Issues around social engagement and isolation, and issues around options, people wanting more choices of where to live as at different phases of aging. A point to keep in mind as we talk about this, and I know our experts will talk even more, as you might imagine, there's great diversity among older Californians. About a quarter are living alone. About a half are in households of 2, and another quarter or so in larger households. So again, great diversity in the housing stock, in the caregiving support, in isolation issues that can come from that housing. And that all comes back to, of course, our Health and Human Services connection. Housing is, of course, a key part of health in the broadest sense that we at the Health and Human Services Agency see as hand in hand. I absolutely want to mention that housing is such a large topic that it has several key interlocking dynamics. First and foremost is homelessness. Homelessness is getting its own deep dive with another panel of all-stars in 2 weeks, Poverty, Hunger, and Homelessness. We'll be hearing from our California's first ever Deputy Secretary of Homelessness, Allie Sutton. We'll be hearing from national leader, Dr. Margot Cushell from UCSF, and extraordinary community group St. Mary's Center in Oakland will also be sharing their perspective. So we're thrilled to be having that in 2 weeks to continue the housing and homelessness conversation. Additionally, houses are not islands. Houses are part of communities. Homes are part of communities. So we will be building on our housing conversation today with webinars on transportation, on parks and built environment, and civic engagement and social environment, really tracking in many ways the World Health Organization framework for livable communities that some of you may be familiar with from AARP, age-friendly communities. So housing is today. Next week is transportation, and you'll hear more about parks and civic engagement very soon. So really spending a lot of time right now talking about that built and social community essential for positive aging. So that was a very quick overview of the master plan and the centrality of housing in all we do. Let's take a break and see who's here with us. Adam Willoughby is CDA's Legislation and Public Affairs Assistant Director, and he will report out who's here.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you to all the participants on this webinar. We have, looks like, well over 100 right now, and thank you to everyone that participated in these polls. I'm going to go ahead and report out results on 3 of the polls that we asked you. The first of which, are you an interested member of the public or employed in the fields of aging or housing? And so with 50% respondents indicated that they were employed in fields of aging. Second, with 33% indicated they were an interested member of the public. And then we will go next to our second poll, which we asked, are you, what age group do you belong to? And so with 26% of respondents indicating they were ages 55 to 64, second at 25%, 45 to 54, and third at 18%, 65 to 74. And our third and final poll, where do you live in California? Looks like most respondents indicated that they live in Northern California. 37% indicated that they live in Northern California. Second at 21% indicated that they live in Los Angeles, and third at 17% indicated that they live in the Bay Area. So thank you again very much for responding to those polls, and please be looking for additional polls as this webinar continues.
And with that, we will hand it off to our state partners at California Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. Lynn, take it away.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Hi, did we successfully get off mute?
Hi, Lynn, we can hear you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to thank the team at the Master Plan of Aging. This has been an incredible project to participate in, and especially I think they've really hit the nail on the head when thinking about some of the challenges and opportunities that our state faces. And as we've been looking through the topics of housing through its unique lens, but also then with the intersectionalities with transportation, affordability, and homelessness, I really think that this idea of livable communities and really reflecting on future challenges and opportunities for the state is the right direction. So thank you so much for your leadership in this space. I also want to just quickly tell everyone who's in the room with me. So Melinda Grant, our Undersecretary at BCSH, is here, as is Junius Berry, who's the Executive Fellow for our agency. And next slide, please. Oh, next slide. Oh, thank you. Perfect. And before we get into the details in too much depth, I wanted to just give a quick snapshot of how the state is involved in housing, particularly looking at all of the different agencies that play a role. So it's important to note that both the administration and the state treasurer are involved in affordable housing in terms of loans, grants, enforcement, and policy through the administration, and then also the provision of tax-exempt bonds and low-income tax credits come from the treasurer. Importantly, also, the Housing and Community Development Department oversees the codes and standards for all types of housing, affordable and market rate, as well as the codes and standards for mobile homes and manufactured homes. Now, there are a significant number of different types of projects and programs in this space, but most affordable housing projects in the state require multiple levels of funding, and these often come from a combination of state and local and private funding channels. So I'm really excited that Mia is here today because I know that she's going to go over what that looks like in practice. But I think using this organizational chart, it's important to see how the money flows from different, and the policy flows from different points within the state itself. Many of the funds can be very flexible, where the only requirements for tenants are linked to income, but funds can also be very tailored towards certain demographic tenants and characteristics. And funds can be both competitive or they can be over the counter, meaning you can put in an application on a first come, first served basis. Funds can go directly to affordable housing developers, to local jurisdictions, or in some cases, they go directly to the homeowners or the renters. And as I mentioned earlier, the funds all come from the above agencies and departments and are very frequently layered together in order to get to optimal affordability levels. All of these entities and the programs that I'm going to reference over the next couple minutes are extensively listed on their websites, and I would encourage you to look there for specific information about programs that may interest you. Next slide, please. So I think that this is a topic that we're probably all very, very aware of, and that is that after decades of underproduction, Californians now face a staggering housing crisis. We see this intrinsically, and we know this quantifiably, that there is not enough supply to match the need and also to reflect the skyrocketing housing and rental costs that are faced by Californians across the state. Affordability issues, which were once confined to coastal and urban regions, are now a problem across the state. And when housing costs are accounted for, California has one of the highest poverty rates in the nation. Half of all renters are rent burdened, meaning that they spend more than 30% of their income towards housing, and nearly 1/3 of all renters are severely rent burdened, meaning that they spend more than half of their income towards housing. One topic that has been increasingly apparent in the last decade is the effect that affordable housing, the access to affordable housing, has on the increasing population of Californians who experience homelessness. At the last point in time counts, we show that 150,000 Californians are experiencing homelessness each year. And that number has been on an upward growth track over the last decade. And as mentioned earlier in the presentation, California's senior population is aging and rapidly changing. And as our senior population is expected to double from 4.5 to 9.5 million persons by 2035. And within this growing population, seniors and persons living with disabilities overwhelmingly fall into low and very low area medium income categories, which is the terminology that we use when looking at how to fund and finance affordable housing. Next slide, please. Just to put this into clearer language, and because it's always helpful to imagine an illustrative situation. Imagine that a senior Californian who lives on a fixed income draw from their Social Security benefit. That individual on average annual would receive $12,179. But the average rent in California ranges from $828 per month in Fresno to $1,800 in Irvine. So while living on an income of just over $12,000, you can expect at the lowest level to pay $10,000 of that in rent. So for many of our citizens, it can be difficult, if not impossible, to secure safe, stable, and affordable housing throughout the state. We also know that low-income seniors benefit from independent, affordable housing that provides, among other critical elements, close proximity to transportation, access to goods and services, reasonable and thoughtful accommodations, and the ability to age in place and access to their community. So when we think about this complexity of cost versus need, that's really what defines one of our critical policy issues of the day. Next slide, please. So while the challenges are complex and multifaceted, we think that it does boil down to three unique challenges when looking particularly at the intersection of housing and an aging population. The first is about housing production. So California needs an estimated 180,000 new units a year, but unfortunately we're producing fewer than 100,000 annually, leaving us a gap of 80,000 units each year. And most of that production is happening at the market rate, which leaves an increasingly large gap in the units that will be increasingly needed for our aging population. Also, for individuals with mobility challenges, living in close proximity to transit options is very, very important. So we have the second challenge of ensuring that affordable housing is built in the right places and connected to the right services to support a senior population. The challenges that we face from local zoning laws that create incentive for urban sprawl and less densely developed housing solutions is a real challenge. Also, while many seniors may choose to stay in their communities to age, single-family or restrictive zoning may be a barrier for getting the right number of units at the right rate located near transit and services such as healthcare, day centers, assisted living facilities, etc. Further, we do have a suite of existing laws that do add complexity to being able to meet these challenges. Just for an example, Proposition 13, while having certain advantages by keeping property tax low for senior homeowners, has now incentivized seniors who may rather downsize to remain in their homes that are too large to maintain, and that also have the dual impact of taking up space for younger, larger families to move into those homes. So this law essentially can, in some ways, incentivize against the desire to move due to the lack of senior-inclusive affordable housing options, as well as the tax structure that's built into this law. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. Thank you. So what are we doing about it? Broadly, we're looking at these challenges through three main lenses. The regulatory role in housing planning. Second, the acceleration and financing of affordable housing production. And third, the offering of services that support the senior population. Next slide. We really do think that planning for this demographic shift is one of the most important roles of the state government. So demographic projections are developed by the state's Department of Finance and are used by the Housing and Community Development Department to develop what's called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA. This is the cycle that tells the Council of Governments the total number of new homes that are needed to be built in order to meet the needs of people at all income and life point levels in their communities. The councils of governments then distribute the needs to cities, towns, and counties within their region. And then the local governments, utilizing that distribution, then update their housing element, which is the portion of the general plan that creates the plan for zoning and permitting for housing projects within their communities. Both the allocation of the RHNA numbers as well as the jurisdiction's housing element plans factor in age and make assumptions about the necessary household sizes each community will need in the future. So this process really does set the baseline for how and where and for whom we're going to be developing new units of housing. Next slide, please. Just a quick snapshot on this, because I think this is really important to understand where we are in this process. So the RHNA is issued on a 5 to 8 year cycle, and we are currently completing the 5th cycle and beginning the 6th cycle now. Given the challenges that we've had with decades of underproduction, the 6th cycle materially sets higher targets than previous cycles, which we believe will result in a zoning process that is more reflective of the needs of our future population. There is also a strong correlation between individuals on fixed income and the need for affordable housing. So the 6th cycle RHNA also sets much higher goals for the quantity of affordable and middle income units that need to be planned for at all levels across the state. And I think this is really important to note, that each level of this process includes community participation and statutorily requires buy-in. This is a good opportunity for stakeholder groups to engage to ensure that their respective governments are factoring in the special needs and considerations for a senior population. Next slide, please. The second big push from the state is on production. The Governor Newsom, during his campaign, spoke very, very clearly about the need to move not just from planning, but also to production of new units. And he set a very ambitious goal that he carried with him from campaign into office to produce 3.5 million new units across California. In this year's budget, the 2020 to 2021, you can see that we are putting dollars towards that goal. There is a total of $6.8 billion in the budget to be spent over the next couple years that focuses on affordable housing production. Within that $6.8 billion, there's a full breakdown within the budget on the Department of Finance website, but a few things to call out for this group. So the Veterans and Affordable Housing Bond Act program adds dollars to existing programs that can support affordable housing for seniors and individuals in lower income ranges. and this will be dispersed across a number of programs that are administered through Housing and Community Development and the Housing Finance Agency. CalHome is a really important project. It includes a variety of eligible activities that support individual homeowners and provides lending through public agencies. And the multifamily housing program, which is essentially the bread and butter affordable housing project for our state, assists in the new construction, rehabilitation, and preservation of permanent and transitional rental housing for lower income individuals. Eligible costs can include social service facilities that are integral to linking to the assisted housing units. And also there's the No Place Like Home. This is a new bond authority program that provides permanent supportive housing for individuals who face chronic homelessness and mental health issues. It applies to all ranges, but I think really hits the nail on the head in terms of recognizing that a growing number of our homeless population are seniors. Secondly, when we think about production, it's not just about the number of units, but it's about where they're placed and making sure that they're placed in a way that helps people live within livable communities. So to that end, we have a couple programs that are very focused on location-based housing, prioritizing high density and infill. The programs that generally come to mind there are the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program and then transit-oriented developing housing, both of those which provide loans and grants. And finally, in terms of production, this administration has been incredibly vocal about encouraging innovation. So we know that we need a variety of solutions to house comfortably and affordably our senior population. And we know that one solution is not going to fit all. So if you look across the executive orders, the budget, the existing programs, and the way that the governor is speaking very openly about what we're trying to do together as a state, you'll see a lot of mention of innovation. And that can mean in terms of accessory dwelling units, new technologies like manufactured and modular, leaning on micro units and tiny homes as solutions, and then also using state properties to be able to help build in locations that are desirable, working with jurisdictions to be able to streamline that process. And then also conversion projects, which will be very important, particularly in suburban rural areas where you can transform motels and hotels into affordable housing, single-family or affordable housing, multifamily housing developments. Next slide, please. And the third area of focus is on services. And so if you look at the 2020-2021 budget proposal, the governor put forward a new project that includes $750 million that will be administered through the Department for Social Services. And this is looking particularly at how we can have projects such as stabilization of board and care facilities, projects to support tenancy services, and then also very, very importantly, rental subsidies to make sure that folks that are living on the margin don't enter into homelessness. Another program that I think is really important, given the importance of mobile homes for a senior population in California, is the Mobile Home Park Rehabilitation and Resident Ownership Program. This is administered through the Housing and Community Development Office and helps ensure that the ownership structure of mobile homes is supported so that tenants can either buy out the mobile home parks and become owners, or a non-for-profit organization can buy these to help keep this important stock of housing online. And also, the Housing and Community Development Department provides significant amount of technical assistance to local jurisdictions and to developers as they're working through how to maximize these dollars, access these dollars, and bring these units and services online. Next slide, please. We did have a chance through this process to take a peek at the first round of stakeholder comments, and reflecting on those, I saw a lot of comments around access to affordable units co-located within communities, and also about rent control. And so I did just want to flag for this group two new pieces of legislation and initiatives that I think help begin to answer those questions. The first is on accessory dwelling units. So as of January 1st, 2020, 3 bills have been passed and will come into action that combined work to remove many of the remaining barriers to accessory dwelling unit development within communities. So these 3 bills combined tackle local zoning ordinances. They provide minimum guarantees for every lot in the state that allows for residential use, and they call for shortened review times to be able to complete the permitting process. And secondly, AB 1482, the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, this requires landlords to limit the increases within a 12-month period to a maximum of 5% inflation from April 1 of the previous year to April 1 of the current year. So we're really beginning to see progress being made here, and I would encourage you to look at the frequently asked questions on Assemblymember Chu's website, which provides a lot more information about how that bill will be rolled out and what that means for communities. And finally, next slide, please. I just wanted to provide this group with some direct links to resources. The first one is the Notice of Funding Availability Calendar for Housing and Community Development, and this gives a very detailed calendar on when these dollars come online and also when the public engagement process starts and ends. And then two program links for the Housing Finance Agency. The first is for home buyers, so that's loans to individuals, and then the second one is multifamily loan programs. So that's for multifamily development, so jurisdictions and developers for the most part. And then finally, we know that there are issues around access and discrimination that are faced by many in these communities, and so always remembering that through the Department for Fair Employment and Housing, there's a process to file complaints that will be investigated through the state process on housing discrimination. And with that, that is the end of my presentation, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of the group and also to fielding questions when the time comes. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to share the polling and the chats. It's great. It's really starting to pop here. First, I want to say we got some great feedback that our initial question on who's with us said, are you a member of the public employed in aging or employed in housing? And in wording it that way, we overlooked the invaluable contributions of volunteers and activists. And so we heard you, we took that feedback, and we will improve that question going forward. Thank you so much. Adam will share the 2 poll results, and then I'll engage with all the great comments coming in.
Great. So we asked 2 additional questions. The first, have you experienced housing cost burden? This means paying more than 30% of income towards rent. And tied at 42%, the two responses, yes, I'm an owner and pay a mortgage. And then the second response, also at 42%, no, I have not experienced being housing cost burden. And then third, at 16%, yes, I'm a renter. So thank you again for responding to that poll. And then the next poll that we asked is, have you or are you considering downsizing or otherwise moving as you age? And with 42% of respondents indicating yes, I would consider it. 38% of respondents indicated that no, I'd rather age in place. And 20% of respondents indicated that they would consider moving as they age. So thanks again for responding to those polls.
And this is the hot topic. The points you hit on, Lynn, on innovation really sparked a nerve with our chatters and our commenters and our questioners. Lots of folks responding. You know, what about home sharing? Don't forget home sharing of existing stock. That should be called out as one of the innovations. And every person who answered the question of, do you have these innovative options to downsize in your community, so far has said no from north to south. It's good to build new housing, but also preserving existing housing, says Jerry. Shannon says a smaller home or She says, I don't feel there are enough affordable options to downsize in my community. A smaller home or rental property would cost more than we spent on our current home. And Meredith chimes in, thank you for highlighting that the rent burden for older adults on fixed income is a huge problem, even with a current affordable housing rent levels. So lots of conversation about innovation and affordability in the intersection of the two. The first comment that came in, if you could scroll back up, said, please be sure we talk about housing with services, housing plus services, and we will absolutely, both Mia Kang and Jeannie Parker Martin will be talking more about that. Housing plus services is coming soon. Let's see, Mia, I'm gonna give you a heads up that a question I know you'll be able to speak to from Aaron. Aaron says, what resources are available to those who may meet resistance from local zoning authorities when attempting to build affordable housing, or her question is residential care in neighborhood settings. So I'm going to just tee that up for you and save that for you, and Jeannie, you as well, if you want to speak to strategies and resources for those working through local zoning issues. Let me see. A couple other questions are coming in. Really important question. Lynn, I'd love to see if you all want to speak to trends towards urbanization versus rural. A commenter, if we can scroll back up. There's so many of you. This is a wonderful, wonderful conversation here. 84% of the population lives in urban areas, says Bill, up from 64%, will be 90%. How is your planning, Lynn, if you would speak to this, how is your planning dealing with the shift to urban populations? How is that incorporated into the agency's approach?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that is part of the process that's undertaken when the Department of Finance creates the top-level demographic information. It's looking at changes in location, it's looking at inflow and outflow from the state, it's looking at folks moving from between different urban to rural, rural to urban environments. And so all of that is factored into the data that goes to housing and community development, who then uses that to then translate that into the total number of housing needs that will be needed for the growth of the state. So that is absolutely one of the factors that plays into the regional housing needs allocation process. It's a really good question.
Great. Other issues coming up. Dara says, I tried for 5 years to get a wheelchair ramp added to my house. No one would do it. Lots of support for home sharing. Oh, and Jeffrey from CARA echoes that. Universal design for housing, key for accessibility and aging. Lots of good feedback on making sure we continue to refine our questions so we allow everyone to answer with all the diversity of experience. So we hear you, we take that. And yes, this is all being recorded. The slides and video on YouTube will be available for future use and viewing. Thank you so much. Let's take a pause because I know both Mia and Jeannie are going to tackle affordability, accessibility, planning, services, all that goes into it with an even more specific lens on senior housing and older Californians. One quick question asking, Martha's asking, what about facilities like memory care centers, assisted living, independent living facilities? Absolutely critical part of continuum of care. For purposes of master plan, we've been having that conversation in our subcommittee focused on the range of long-term services and supports. We had a special meeting focused on residential care facilities, including boarding care, including nursing homes, including retirement facilities earlier in January, and that's all posted on our website too. So yes, we are committed to covering all the spectrum of housing, just each session taking a different slice. With that, Mia, can I hand it off to you?
Sure, thank you, Kim. I'm Mia Kang, and I just want to applaud the state in their leadership. I mean, this is monumental. As a housing developer, I've been a housing developer for over 20 years. I've built about 1,100 units of affordable housing in the state. And this is the first time I've seen this much energy around planning, innovation, removing barriers. So I want to applaud Lynn and her Department of Business, Transportation, and Housing. and Kim and her team on planning this master plan. It's absolutely needed, and we're very excited to play a role in helping to provide some input. Again, I'm Mia Kong, the California Commission on Aging. Next slide. The California Commission on Aging is a diverse group of appointees, and we're the state's principal advocate for older adults, and we work to advise the governor and the legislature along with other agencies on programs and services that affect older adults. And we spend about 4 times a year going around the state in rural, urban, and suburban areas, working, listening to what's happening on the ground with regards to senior services, where the lack thereof of financing or programs, but also the great innovation that happens on the ground. For example, we were in Stanislaus last year, and transportation was the greatest issue. And so a volunteer started taking senior veterans to doctor's appointments, and that morphed into an entire rideshare program that finally got county funding. So, you know, and home sharing, for example, we were in Marin last year with a great example of how Marin is looking at home sharing, given the high percentage of home ownership in older adults living in the Marin County area. And that's really brought interesting partnerships. And it's primarily nonprofits that come in as that sort of, let's just call them matching service, where they can bring together potential residents to share homes with potential seniors in their homes. So, you know, a lot of innovations happening on the ground, and we're excited to continue to bring those stories up to the state level and find great solutions. Next slide. But again, I'm going to really speak from the perspective of what I know, which is building low-income affordable housing, and primarily senior housing. And as a developer in the state, as we all know, one of the biggest challenges to getting more housing on the ground is developing new housing in areas that are central to where we want housing to be, close to jobs, services, and transportation. But quite honestly, as everyone knows, you know, building or buying anything in California is expensive. Land costs are very high. Finding a particular piece of land that meets all the requirements, often entitlement risk, trying to get your approvals. We have many CEQA challenges, projects get sued. And then oftentimes you find a piece of site that might work on all different levels, but it's missing major key pieces of infrastructure that will cost millions of dollars to get done. So these are, you know, inherent challenges that we have to overcome in developing affordable housing. So we get very, very creative when it comes to land. And I'll show you a few examples in my case studies next. You know, if we're lucky enough to find a piece of land, then we really have to go through the effort of trying to get the financing. And you heard Lynn with her wonderful description of all the amazing resources that the state has available, but as you can tell, it's very, very complex. And in order to compete for state funding, you also have to start at the local level, that's the city or the county, and bringing together some, you know, local subsidy to help with the affordable housing. When we're building affordable housing, these are quite honestly permanently affordable. We're talking 99 years, in some cases 55-year minimum, regulatory restrictions restricting units to be low income for that period of time. And with that, you have to have usually some sort of local support. In the old days, we had something called redevelopment, where cities had dollars to invest in affordable housing. But these days we have, you know, sometimes in Alameda or San Francisco or Santa Clara, you have local property tax bond funds that help to support housing, you know, or in other cases, you might have direct subsidies from HUD. And those funds are then brought it together to bring a stack of financing to build the project. But the stack of financing is very hard to get. It's challenging. It's, you know, you don't know for sure if you're going to get it. In some cases, one of the key affordable housing resources, the 9% tax credit, has a cap, 10% cap for the state on senior housing specifically. And so I've experienced in 2 occasions where my project was the highest ranking project for a 9% award in that region, but we had just met the cap. So the project was skipped over and given to a family project. So those types of things make it a little bit more challenging to get senior housing encouraged in certain locations. And then also in some state programs, affordable housing, there really isn't a set aside, or in some cases, they're tailored more towards family housing. You know, if there can be a broader scope placed on some of the state programs that would allow for more senior housing direct sources or prioritization, that would help. And as you heard earlier, Lynn and Kim talked about, the need of rental assistance, given that many low-income seniors on fixed incomes really lack the necessary rent to pay ongoing. And, having a rental assistance program would really help keep seniors in their homes. And we also face, as everyone knows, we've got a high construction cost burden. And to build in California, you're paying high labor costs, high material costs, and you're competing for demand of a smaller workforce. So, we face higher construction costs. So again, innovation to bring down costs is also important. But what's also important and why we, in some cases, have higher construction costs is we're also meeting some wonderful state goals like green building. We're putting solar panels on buildings. We're doing green roofs, and maybe we're cleaning up dirty soil, and we're doing all kinds of things to redevelop sites to kind of bring in new neighborhoods and stitch neighborhoods back together again. And I think, for me, building affordable senior housing, one of the key things I really try to instill in every project that we build is robust social services. And we might be able to physically build the space like a senior center, but often we lack the ongoing revenue to provide the supportive service funding ongoing. And that becomes a challenge in trying to piece all of that together. So these are sort of some typical barriers we face, but the reality is all barriers can be overcome. And let me show you a few examples of some projects I've done in the state that have been successful. This is a project in Oakland, California, where originally the site was the third busiest hotspot for all emergency calls in the city of Oakland. It was known, it was a very popular drug haven, and it had a negative impact on the neighborhood for 25 years. And in fact, when Jerry Brown was mayor of Oakland, he passed the blight law in which this motel was used first to be condemned. I was able to purchase it, tear it down, remove the blight. Next slide. And we built Lincoln Court, which is 81 units for seniors in Oakland, California. We were able to bring the building down to the scale. We removed about 4,500 tons of soil to bring a strong edge to the corner. And it became transformed into a model senior supportive housing complex. After the project was built, the neighborhood crime also dropped 40%. And it really spurred the entire revitalization of this district, which is called the Diamond District. And immediately following this project, a new grocery store, coffee house, and businesses all sprung up along MacArthur Boulevard. It's also along one of the busiest bus corridors in the city. And so it's very frequented by buses. And so with that, we really had to work hard to get increased zoning, increased density, and reduced parking to help this project pencil out. Originally, the site was allowed 30 units to the acre. We were approved at 82 units to the acre. Originally, we had a parking space requirement of 2.5 parking spaces per unit. That would have required a 2-level underground parking garage, which was absolutely unaffordable. We were able to get it approved at 0.56 parking spaces per unit, and hence the project has maintained its ratios, and we do not have a parking problem because of our access to transit. And folks have made it work, even if they did have cars. And many of them actually choose not to have a car because it just makes their life a lot easier. These are primarily 1- and 2-bedroom units, and they are 100% affordable. The lowest income levels are 20%. We have a 30% set aside for homeless seniors with a chronic disability. So this is Lincoln Court is Oakland's first 100% low-income supportive senior housing project built in the city of Oakland. It was also one of the fastest entitlements. We did it in 6 months. And this was back in 2006. Next slide. So Lincoln Court has a robust senior center. Originally, we had tried to make the senior center an adult day health center, but funding disappeared for that. So we worked with our partner, Self-Help for the Elderly, and we devised an open senior center model where we strung together partners from all over, community college partners, health partners, all kinds of partners to work with us to support the 30% seniors with a chronic disability, as well as seniors from the entire neighborhood. We had a meals program, we had seniors from all over that would come in, and we had exercise classes and activity classes that were open to the public. It really became a great success, and when we leased up, again, 81 units, we leased up in 2 weeks, and we had over 2,000 applicants apply. So very much in demand. Many of the seniors came from Oakland, and it was a wonderful diversity of the city that was represented in this project. Next slide. I'm bringing you now to Pittsburgh, California, which is in Contra Costa County. This is the city of Pittsburgh, and back in the recession, there was a developer who was going to build sort of the crowning jewel in their downtown, 3 blocks of market rate housing. And unfortunately, the recession hit, and they got about 80% done with the first block and had to forego the other 2 sites and went into foreclosure. So the city was stuck with what unfortunately were a bunch of empty sites, 2 acres in size of each parcel. The city worked with us to develop the parcel here with the green arrow. Next slide. And we worked with the city very carefully to get them motivated to help us increase density. The original allowable density on the site was 20 units to the acre. We ended up getting approved at 55 units to the acre. We were able to reduce our parking requirement to 1 parking space per unit, which we still argued was a little bit high. And to be quite honest, it's currently occupied, and the parking spaces are about 0.5 per unit. So about half of the residents have cars, the other half do not. This was the first density bonus project in the city's history, and that's a state law that helps enable affordable housing to get a boost in density and some other development incentives to help get the project to fit on the site. And this was completed in 2002, right at the same time of our foreclosure crisis and recession. So about 25% of all the residents living here when they first moved in came out of homes that were foreclosed. And this was their safe haven, and they were able to stay in their communities. And so it really was a triumph in terms of timing. Next slide. And so looking at it, it's 111 units. It's 4 stories on one side, and then it tapers to a 3-story building on the main 10th Street, which is a commercial corridor. It's mixed use, so we have about 10,000 square feet of retail, and then the rest are apartments. Within the courtyard, we also have things like a bocce court and a nice open space. We also have a very large community room that has computer learning center, and we also offer services. And within the complex, we have exercise rooms and really just very efficient apartments that are affordable. And the majority of people who move in stay for several years. The turnover rate of these apartments are very low. Next slide. So moving down to Southern California, we're now in Los Angeles County in the city of El Monte. And so again, during the foreclosure crisis, there were a lot of problem areas that had a lot of leftover land that was foreclosed. So this property was a foreclosed piece of property. The developer tried to build some market rate senior housing. That failed. The bank had it. Anyway, we worked out a very creative land acquisition to buy this site. And next slide. Transform it into the city's very first mixed-use development in the city of El Monte. And again, we had to change the zoning. We started out with 20 units to the acre, approved at 66 units to the acre. Again, we had to reduce parking, started at 1.5 parking spaces per unit, and we ended up at 0.8. So you start to see the formula. Senior housing, we can build a little bit denser, we can reduce parking, we can, and once we cluster those, we build community, we have great open spaces, and we can also provide services to our population. Next slide. This building was also the first LEED certified building ever built in the city of El Monte. LEED is the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's a building certification process that measures health and high efficiency and cost-saving buildings. Not only is it has multiple solar panels, I think we're going on 100% of all of our common area is off of solar. We've also were able to build to partner with the local nonprofit to build the first on-site wellness center. So that was with the Cleaver Clinic. And we were able to build out a small wellness center. And 30% of this population living here in El Monte were frequent users of LA County's emergency rooms, and that also were at risk of being homeless. And so again, this population, we were able to integrate with a mixed population and provide services for the entire resident population. Next slide. And residential care facilities, this is actually the only one I've ever built, and this was many years ago with my partner Self Help for the Elderly. We had a rare opportunity where Self Help had a HUD 811 grant, which is a rental assistance grant for individuals with disabilities. They originally had a project in another location, they lost their site, and they were at risk of losing this funding. That was very valuable because it was project-based rental assistance. And I was able to work with them. It was a needle in the haystack. We found the perfect building in the right zip code, in the right census tract, and it was 2 units. It was actually the last Victorian in a redeveloped area called the Western Addition, and we were able to purchase it, tear out the old facilities that were not historic, recover all the historic elements, and build a 15-bed residential care facility, 100% for low-income seniors. It's actually the first residential care home dedicated to seniors with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And with that, Self Help can also provides trained staff with Alzheimer's and dementia, and also it's multilingual with 24-hour care. And they also work with their own adult day health center to bus and take folks to various places like shopping and activity centers so they can spend the day in other places. And there's parks nearby, and it's an area that is really well loved. It also has a wonderful rooftop garden where you can see City Hall and the rest of San Francisco. And it's a jewel in the middle of San Francisco. This is in the Hayes Valley neighborhood, near Chinatown and near Japantown. So moving forward, next slide. So as much as all these projects are great, they're still hard to do. Each one is a one-off. Each one takes time. Each one takes nurturing. And so in order to get greater production of senior housing that is affordable, that uses these multi-layers of financing, it would be great for us to continue to align state funding programs with master plan goals. And by doing so, we can identify new sources for rental assistance and supportive services for our seniors, to help them age in place, and prioritize and create funding set-asides in a variety of funding pots right now that don't have a set-aside. Maybe we can create a funding stream that we know could be dedicated for senior housing, and it will allow us to be creative and have more prediction on funding availability. I think one of the other challenges that I mentioned earlier is not only is it to finance wellness centers on site, but it's this ongoing financing of how do we get, whether they are adult day health centers, day centers, respite centers for caregivers, senior centers, all of these things can all, what's wonderful about the sort of new housing that we're building, a lot of them tend to be denser, as you've seen in my examples, and have a ground floor aspect that could be utilized for an on-site service center. But oftentimes they're small. Maybe it's 4,000 square feet. Maybe it's at the most 10,000 square feet. But oftentimes groups like PACE program need about 20,000 square feet to build a financially feasible supportive PACE program. And so maybe we can innovate in finding funding sources that create ongoing funding in a smaller prototype that can fit in more of these urban sort of affordable housing mixed use type scenarios. And then lastly, as we said earlier, we know that our population is changing quite a bit, and in almost every county in the state, we'll see its median age rise by more than 5 years. And so, obviously our state is graying, and currently where we have actually the highest percentage of seniors are in rural California, and that's been brought up before. And unfortunately, in some of those cases, rural California and suburban California don't necessarily qualify as competitively in some of these state financing programs. And so I think it would behoove us to find different ways where we can provide more accessible and affordable housing options in and around communities where aging adults currently live. So that would include rural and suburban. Anyway, I can take it. That's the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mia Kong. Lots and lots of comments about how wonderful all of those homes looked. Adam, can you share the formal poll results with us? And then I will share some of the comments and chats and recommendations that have come in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So we asked a number of polls during Mia's presentation. The first poll we asked you to tell us about your household makeup. And so 42% of respondents indicated that they are under age 55. 27% of respondents indicated that they are 55 years of age living with a partner or spouse. And third at 10% indicated that they're 55 years of age living alone.
Same number as 55 living with one adult family member. Interesting.
Exactly. And then the second poll we asked was on housing choice. We asked, if you needed affordable housing, would you consider living in affordable apartments similar to the ones presented by Mia? And with a resounding 77%, respondents indicated that they would. 17% indicated that they were not sure. The third poll that we asked was relating to density. We asked, do you support higher density and lower parking requirements when it comes to senior housing? Again, with a resounding 74%, folks indicated that they would support the higher density. 21% indicated that they were not sure. The fourth poll that we asked was related to transportation. We asked, how important is having public transportation close to senior housing? Again, 71% of respondents indicated that this would be essential. 23% indicated very important, and 5% said somewhat important. And the fifth and final poll that we asked during Mia's presentation was related to social services. We asked, how important is it to integrate social services with new senior housing? 63% of folks indicated that this would be essential. 28% said very important. 9% said somewhat important. So thank you again very much for responding to those polls.
Great. I'd like to open it up to the panel in just a second to speak to probably the hottest topic of the question that came out, which is about local issues. One person asked about NIMBYism. Sybil says, is there, Sherry, I'm sorry, Sherry says that sometimes there's some NIMBYism around set-asides for low-income seniors or seniors perceived at risk of homelessness. Sybil had a question about zoning, and are set-asides for senior housing possibly considered discriminatory or not legal? So I think we've had this question about Mia or other panelists want to speak to. Actually, Mia, why don't you take this one to start? Strategies for working through local issues and local questions and concerns.
Yeah, well, that is a great question. And I think there have been recent state bills. So again, if you are building deed restricted, affordable, low-income housing, there are now more tools in the tool chest from a legislative perspective that could help get through some of the zoning issues on the site. So SB 35, Senator Wiener's bill, will offer by right zoning in certain areas that are already zoned housing or multifamily. And let me just clarify, because someone said, oh, can you zone senior housing? Just so you know, the developer chooses to build senior housing, the zoning is just multifamily. So it's just what is allowed. So from a local zoning standpoint, it's really just, you know, is it single family zoning? Is it multifamily zoning? Is it mixed use zoning? Is it commercial zoning or retail zoning? So that's kind of the zoning bucket, and they don't really take it down to the level of, is it affordable? Is it market rate? Is it senior? Is it family? But as a developer, you can come in and part of your, part of what's in your tool chest are these funding pots, and how do you bring them together? And then we also look at the neighborhood and what maybe makes the best fit for that neighborhood. Say it's an older neighborhood, maybe it's a suburban neighborhood, like in the case of our Pittsburgh project, senior housing really made sense there. There was a lot of seniors already in the area, the need was there. So, you know, and it was better in terms of impact than putting large families in the downtown. So a lot of it is choice, and then we work with local governments to kind of make sure that they are in agreement with how we are developing the project. And oftentimes too, especially when you're building affordable housing, the local government is your partner. So they are providing support, whether it's planning support, whether it's funding support. And we often, as affordable housing developers, work carefully with our local governments to make sure that we, you know, that our goals are aligned. So again, there are some, and we are watching as it progresses through the legislature this year. SB 50 is also looking at sort of a by right zoning for housing, multifamily housing that also has an affordable housing element to it, or it could be 100% affordable. And so that also helps. And then Assemblymember Chu last session has a new density bonus bill that you can actually get 80% density boosts on existing sites if you're building 100% affordable. So there are a number of different tools that could be utilized to help get through the local zoning conundrum in some cases. And that also helps local governments not take the heat from neighborhoods. So in other words, because it's such a, affordable housing is in such demand, there really needs to be this approach where just because you're a neighbor and you're unhappy with change doesn't mean you could stop the project. And so there's a greater purpose in some of these bills that are out there against that.
Thank you, Mia. And you may have spoken to this already too, but there's been questions about housing that would be multi-generational. It sounds like that overall push for affordable housing would help with multi-generational housing, which can be so great for older adults' health and isolation.
Yes, we like that. Quite honestly, that we have a little bit of challenge in the financing. So if we do multi-generational, and the company I work with now, Related California, we've done several projects. They just have to be financed separately. So there isn't a mechanism that will allow us to finance. You have to choose a type. You are either senior or you are family, and so, or you are special needs in the way that we finance it. So we can absolutely do multi-generational. The site has to be large enough for that. And, we have to be able to finance both pieces separately. If there was an innovative program that allowed for a mix like that, that's a little bit easier to do, where it's more of a one-stop type of opportunity, I think that would be an enhancement as well.
Ah, interesting. And one more question about, is there housing that has specifically developed with people with chronic conditions or disabilities in mind that perhaps has easier access to health and social services to support those folks' health and well-being?
Well, I'm very excited about the whole person funding. That's looking at some, I know enough to be dangerous. I haven't used it yet, but it tends to be a little bit more around homelessness, but it's looking at like Medi-Cal dollars to help on the service side of things, which quite honestly would be a huge help. Even when we're building supportive housing, the supportive population, if you're chronically homeless or you have a chronic disease, those folks are in more need. And oftentimes it means more wear and tear on apartments. For example, true stories. Sometimes folks with, with special needs will forget to turn off the faucet in the bathtub and it will flood the entire floor. Or someone's cooking and they forget to turn off the stove and they put a dish rag on there and then they start a fire. I mean, we have challenges when we are integrating these populations. So having the funding support from case management to programs to even day centers really helps with the management of these. And so, we have challenges. We're working them out at the property management level, but all of these projects that have sort of elements of, greater care or support do cost the housing more money. And because we are landlords of deed restricted affordable units, that means all the rental income is pretty low. And so we don't have a lot of discretionary funds. And so finding supplements to really help this aging population. And also what's happening is we have a lot of older senior projects that were built 20, 30 years ago that have a quite aging population in them without any services. And so again, kind of finding these missing pieces to be able to lift a few more boats with social service dollars that would help both the properties, maybe as well as the greater neighborhood, would be a great advantage to the future.
Thank you, Mia. You have done such a tremendous job in connecting housing to everything else. There have been, I want to take this moment to say, many people are asking about homelessness and boarding care. And again, Jerry, Lisa, Lydia, that will be in our webinar in 2 weeks, homelessness. Another questions come up around disaster preparedness and emergency and how do we evacuate people who may be upstairs, and that will be a special focus of a webinar later in February, emergency preparedness and response. for aging and disabled populations. Another question came up, and thank you, Mia, for raising it. How can we integrate healthcare with social services and housing service? That will be a webinar in March. So housing is really everywhere. This is our kickoff of the housing conversation, but you will hear it over and over again in transportation, in parks and built environment, in isolation, in homelessness, in disaster preparedness, and in health and housing partnerships. So thank you for all of that. One final note before I hand it over to our Stakeholder Advisory Committee member, Jeannie Parker-Martin. Thank you for all the operational feedback. We are, if you can't see the poll, we're trying to help you out. I'm so glad to hear there's a group of folks watching with Jack, and Jack's good feedback is these polls are made for individuals, but not for groups. So we will take that back and see how to make the polling work better for people watching as a group. Great, great feedback. And all of us are trying to make sure our sound is consistent and close to the mic. So keep letting us know if you're having challenges so we can keep improving. With that, Jeannie, I'll hand it over to you to bring it all together.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. And I'm honored to be in this distinguished group. And also I want to thank the Master Plan for Aging team who is so impressive and is working so hard every day to pull a great plan for the state together. And Mia's and Lynn's conversations were so good. The presentations were excellent. Just really honored to be in this team. Each message today, I think, brings so much depth to our discussion and reminds us of the existing housing, its potential for development, some of the barriers to development, and how we should be thinking about housing in the context of the Master Plan for Aging. And as Kim indicated, I'm Jeannie Parker-Martin. I'm the president and CEO of Leading Age California, and we have a very major focus on senior affordable housing across the state and also at the national level. I'm also a member of the Master Plan for Aging Stakeholder Advisory Committee and the Master Plan for Aging Research Subcommittee. So it gives me a perspective on what's happening across the various committees and also some of the particular housing issues. So next slide, please. As Kim McCoy-Wade mentioned earlier in her remarks, the Master Plan for Aging has a very bold vision and important goals that are paramount to the next decade in California. As a member of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, I wanted to highlight a few key points about the committee itself before I make a few more remarks. There are 34 members, and these represent a diverse cross-section of the state. There are older adults, younger adults, diverse ethnic and social groups represented, trade associations representing providers and consumers and workers, and other key stakeholders. And at each committee meeting, there are members of the public that join in the conversation and ask questions and make comments relevant to the particular topic at hand. The list of the members can be found on the Master Plan for Aging website if you're interested in learning more about each of the individual members. As a committee, we're reviewing thousands of comments and recommendations that have come in from the general public, as well as individuals and organizations wishing to make formal recommendations to the plan. It's very interesting, and it's also an incredibly important part of our work. And the polling results today, I also think, are really important because they help inform us, again, differently based on the conversation at hand, and are helpful as it expands our total voice in this process. We're going to develop parts of the master plan and advise the California Health and Human Service Agency and the cabinet level work group on aging in the development of the master plan. Today, I'll discuss a few of the comments and recommendations that we've received to date. And as you can see on the slide, we've received about 136 recommendations through the public comment section, as well as additional formal responses that were submitted to the request. So my comments really are insights from today and a summary of some of those public comments, and will continue to be vetted by the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, the Research Subcommittee, and the Cabinet Level Work Group on Aging as we put together the full plan in the coming months. So next slide, please. As Kim mentioned earlier, key comments from the public have included issues related to affordability, accessibility, social engagement and isolation, and a desire to have options. And as you heard from Lynn and Mia, there are many considerations related to housing and how we are and must address in the context of the 4 goals Kim spoke about earlier. As you also heard, Governor Newsom is not only supportive, but he's made a strong commitment through budget initiatives, increased production, and innovation in affordable housing. The state has initiatives for planning, production, and services, such as the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And you heard the $16.8 billion in the state budget for affordable housing production. This is really critical because one of the questions we get asked repeatedly is, how are things going to be funded? And this is an example of how we might look to the budget to help expand housing in the state. There are models of low and moderate income affordable housing that are critical for future development, such as accessory dwelling units, modular tech, tiny homes, and no place like home initiatives that you heard about. Yet there still are a lot of barriers to housing. There are barriers to housing construction. These limitations mitigate the interest by developers and often cause long and costly and burdensome delays. There's an increasing number of older adults who have housing insecurity, are rent burdened, and live in extreme poverty. Having to make decisions and choose to pay for food or medicine or rent is difficult. And many cannot pay for all three at the same time and have to go without one or another, leading to more severe illness, perhaps more severe homelessness, and also perhaps lack of dietary sustenance. There's also access to affordable housing that's extremely challenging in many counties around the state. Although there are advances in some areas, as you've heard today, that are lifting some of the burdens, and some of the challenges are being mitigated by local action. This also has led to a great and extreme caregiver burden. Caregivers lack education, they lack training, and they lack reimbursement to obtain education and training or any sort of expense support. As a state, we lack funding sources for rental assistance. We lack a solid infrastructure for home and community-based services that help support people to live at home, age in place, and use affordable housing. So as a state, we need to expand not only affordable housing, but some of the services that help support affordable housing, like the assisted living waiver and important programs such as PACE, the Program for All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly. And we have to build the infrastructure as we progress for home and community-based services. Hopefully the new budget initiatives that you heard about and the master plan for aging that we're creating now will help eliminate many of these barriers from being significant considerations as we move ahead. Next slide, please. The Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies produced a critical report last year, and I think some of the data that you heard in some of the other presentations probably were called out from that data. The report is called the Housing America's Older Adults for 2019. And information in the report targets state level information estimates that in California, 1.3 million households of older adults are housing cost burden, meaning they pay more than 30% of their income toward housing costs. And we hear that repeatedly in comments from the public. 700,000 of the 1.3 million are extremely housing cost burden, paying more than 50% of their income towards housing costs. They're priced out of their homes due to increases in rents, taxes, or utilities, and the impact, as was stated earlier about Prop 13, has unintended consequences that we couldn't have expected years ago. There also is a heavy reliance on Social Security without other assets or savings, and there are estimates that nationwide, more than 75% of the people of older adults over age 65 have savings of less than $100,000. Next slide, please. So the theme, next slide, please. So the theme in almost all the comments are that people want to age in place. They need accessible, affordable housing. And this is reflected as well in your polling comments. Rent burden spirals into homelessness. The need for tax release after retirement for individuals at certain income levels. There needs to be increased incentives for landlords to reduce rents perhaps for low to moderate income individuals. and increase in co-housing opportunities, which I think came up in the comments a little bit ago. When we talk about expanding the assisted living waiver and PACE, you may not be as familiar with these two programs. The assisted living waiver is a home and community-based services waiver that was created by legislation that directed the California Department of Health and Human Services to develop and implement the project to test the efficacy of assisted living as a Medi-Cal benefit. There currently are a limited number of spaces for assisted living waiver, and we advocate for more. And PACE is the program for all-inclusive care for the elderly, which is a little bit like a managed healthcare plan. It allows people who are nursing home eligible to receive a variety of services that normally would be provided in a hospital, emergency room, or in a facility. One of the complexities and confusing parts for all of these services is the varying ages that one becomes eligible. So you heard me mention 65 a few times, but in other presentations or other services that you may receive or may have reached out for, the age eligibility might be 55, it might be 62, it might be 65 or some other area. So one of the things that we're grappling with in the master plan for aging, should there be, as there is for childhood when you start school, should there be some plan and trajectory that helps us prepare better for the services that we may need and may be eligible for as we age. Next slide, please. So the themes in the public comments are drawn from the public submission and reflect themes made in earlier today, in today's webinar. One, we need more affordable housing for older adults. Whatever the age threshold is, we need more affordable housing for older adults for the reasons that you've heard. Many low income and moderate to middle income individuals are in need of affordable housing. We need to increase the supply of affordable housing. We need to create a state rental assistance program. We need to support co-housing and home sharing programs, like one that was recommended in the recommendation, COVIA's Home Match program. We need to support training for older adult employment that relates and allows people to live in more affordable situations. Secondly, we need service-enriched housing. One of the most effective ways that California can reduce healthcare costs while improving health outcomes is to create more service-enriched, affordable senior housing. Housing is a critical component of our healthcare delivery system, and as we like to say here at Leading Age California, housing is healthcare, even though we know it's much more complex than that. Without a safe and stable place to live, it's difficult for seniors to receive proper and effective preventive care and treatment for chronic conditions. But when coupled with healthcare and social services, affordable senior housing is shown to reduce emergency room visits and premature admittance to skilled nursing facilities. In California, the cost of keeping an older adult independent in their own home averages 64% less than nursing home care. The third element is the assisted living waiver expansion. I mentioned earlier what that actually means. Currently, we have 5,744 slots for the assisted living waiver, and there is an effort to advocate for 18,500, which would better meet the demand for the assisted living waiver than currently. Individuals over 65 receive long-term personal care and household tasks, and it would save California, based on earlier estimates related to some legislation, of $12.5 million annually. In summary, at the next stakeholder advisory meeting, we'll consider 5 key recommendations that you'll see on the right hand of the slide. We also will consider any other recommendations that come in after or during today's webinar. To increase affordable housing supply for older adults that are low or moderate income, to increase service-enriched affordable housing, to create a state rental assistance program for older adults who are low to moderate income, to expand the assisted living waiver, and also to enhance accessibility to home and community-based services. In this regard, we feel that these are recommendations and insights from the public, from the communications that we've received, and from conversations that are ongoing in the Stakeholder Advisory Committee committee. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Kim. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have one poll result and then a couple excellent questions we'll tackle momentarily.
Great. So during Jeannie's presentation, we asked to please tell us what you consider the top barrier to obtaining affordable housing in California. And so we had a tie with responses. The first at 33% was waiting list is too long in my community. The second, also at 33%, rent is too high for me to access affordable housing in my community. And then number two, at 27%, folks indicated that affordable housing was not available in their community.
And then we asked folks to weigh in on the barriers and more informally, two of the ones that are surfacing are local NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and how we switch it to YIMBYism, yes in my backyard, and then private developer incentives to make sure that the point system for private development funding and the barriers are low enough for entry, that it works for private developers to build this housing. Two final areas I want to lift up, which are the perfect place for us to wrap up. One is about cultural populations and how housing can be developed with and for communities such as African American, Latino, Asian American, Native American. Kiara is asking about cultural communities, and Bill is calling out that there's only LGBTQ specific elder housing in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and I believe he said San Diego. How do we make sure that housing across the state is a welcoming home for the diversity of California? Mia or Jeannie, do you want to take that?
Yeah, this is Jeannie. I think there are many ways that we can make housing accessible and acceptable across a variety of situations, regardless of the diversity of the individual. The kinds of input that we're getting through this process, I think is helping. The neighborhoods where housing is being developed will help in terms of, I think, acceptance and diversity. And also, as we move forward, the workforce that's working in affordable housing and also supporting affordable housing through service-enriched housing will also be trained and create atmospheres that are more accessible and accepting of diversity in their communities. So those are a couple of comments. I also think that through public awareness, like Together We Engage for the Master Plan for Aging, I think these kinds of opportunities for public engagement help increase awareness and acceptance of different types of social and economic and ethnic or diversity situations.
Mia, anything to add?
Yeah, thanks. No, and I think everything Jeannie says I agree with. I think what is happening, and it's a couple of my examples, because we're building in areas that have high diversity, our population tends to be reflective of the population in which we are surrounded by. So we find ourselves in San Francisco very culturally diverse. In Los Angeles, the majority of the residents are Asian American. It's already happening by virtue of location. And these are the neighborhoods, and these are the services that cater to this particular population. So I think it is already happening. And I think the reality, just so you know too, we can't hold units for a specific class. We can prioritize folks, we can encourage them, but it does, because the funding is for low-income housing is both federal and state funds, we cannot hold units for a specific class, but we can market to everybody and have a very fair and open process. And then by virtue of just self-selection and community, we get a lot of cultural diversity.
Excellent. And this is the perfect time for me to announce that Master Plan for Aging, at the direction of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, has created an equity work group that begins meeting in 2 weeks to review all to inform and advise and ultimately review all developing recommendations to be sure driving towards equitable, diverse, and inclusive outcomes in our master plan. So thank you for elevating everywhere and always the importance of equity. I want to close by just lifting up a theme that has come up throughout this conversation, starting with our state partner, our local leader, and our SAC member, which is innovation. People are calling out for innovation, home sharing, co-housing, co-locating services, whether it's day centers or multi-purpose senior services, looking at retail, making sure that when seniors live together, Amy says, where are the statewide guidelines? We see more seniors living together in our communities, but there's been issues around licensing or regulation. Is that an illegal boarding care? How is that different from college students living together? Lorinda also asked about the ability for people to have a caregiver live with them and both be a source of health and well-being and income, and how do you manage regulation and licensing? So much creativity here that we can take into the master plan and elevate and work through so that we are driving innovation and local solutions with all of your expertise and partnership. With that, we will close. Materials, your information, video, all to be posted, and we hope to see you back next week for transportation and in 2 weeks for homelessness. Thanks so much.